I'll introduce myself first. I'm Angelique Poe. I'm the president of Vancouver Centre. And on behalf of Vancouver Centre, I'd like to say that I'm really happy that One License is here to give this presentation today. I've heard from a lot of you that have questions about the legalities of using music in your online church services, whether streamed or recorded on Zoom and YouTube. And it's been a very confusing year for all of us working at churches. So I hope that this presentation will be useful for you and it can answer a lot of your questions. As a reminder, we'll have time for questions at the end, so please keep your microphones turned off, and at the end, we'll invite questions. Right now, I'd like to introduce our presenters from One License. We have the General Manager, Brenda Cronin, and Assistant Manager, Katie Deaver. So I'll turn it over to the two of you.
Well, thank you so much for having us. It's so good to be with all of you. My name is Brenna Cronin. I'm the General Manager of One License. I'm based in Chicago, so we're just a couple of hours ahead of you. And again, it's just really good to be with all of you. I know that there are some questions that were submitted in advance, so we are prepared to talk about those, and we'll welcome your questions as well afterwards. I'll have a little bit of a brief presentation, an overview of general copyright awareness, which some of you may be very well versed in. So I'll ask you to humor me for those of you who do have that knowledge. And then Katie will go through some of our Q&As. I also want to mention too that it's very, very likely that we may not be able to have enough time to get to all questions and all areas of copyright. It's quite a complex thing, but we have some good resources that we can point you towards. So hopefully you leave with at least knowing one good thing that you've learned today. Katie will also be adding some links into the chat. So you may choose to copy and paste those into your own notes for your own awareness. So you can keep track of that as well. So again, good to be with all of you. Katie, feel free to introduce yourself.
Wonderful. So yes, I am Katie. I'm actually over in the Eastern time zone in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, so a little bit further ahead of everybody than Brenna is time-wise. I am an organist by trade, so really excited to be able to be here with you today and very much understand, you know, the year in the trenches, right? That we've been trying to navigate and figure out what we're doing and how to do it correctly, right? And still be able to have that worshipful feeling and do our jobs and our ministry as well, right? So very excited to be with all of you today. Thank you for the invitation.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. I appreciate it. So we'll dive in a little bit, give you an awareness of some of the agenda items that we're going to be covering today. So we'll go through a little bit of an overview of copyright and then our vision specifically, One License for licensing. We'll talk about some of our premier member publishers, avoiding penalties for non-compliance, challenges facing churches and the pandemic, the element of it being a justice issue. This is a piece that's really important to us. We'll talk a little bit also about some places that you can go for infographics and learning about the different types of licenses that we have if you don't happen to be a license holder with us yet. Best practices for posting your services online, displaying permissions and copyright claims, all kinds of stuff we could talk about in that section there. And then again, like I mentioned at the beginning, some blog references that we can share with you for your future learning, and then our new user webinar as well. So first, I want to start by sharing that if you're not a license holder with us, and if you'd like to be, we have a promotion code for you. So you'll save 10% off of your annual and podcast streaming license bundle if you're a brand new user to our service. You can use that code, and if you have any issues using that code, you can email our team too, and we'd be happy to help. So again, this is for brand new bundle license holders. We're happy to share that promo code with you for having us join your webinar today. So something I think that's important to highlight and just to be very well aware of as we continue to navigate ourselves through this difficult, unprecedented, you can pick your adjective of the day, time that we happen to be in, is that there are some really unique challenges that our churches are facing. I generally use the word organizations because it isn't just churches. We work with funeral homes, with schools, with hospitals, with retreat centers, religious communities. So you may hear me using the word organizations to refer to everyone. I think that in the world of ministry, there is already this sense of turnover and burnout that can happen. There are new roles that are being expected of folks. And then when you add the pandemic on top of that, it makes for a lot of stress and it makes for a lot of challenges. And we hope that in this conversation today, and really and truly in all of our conversations, that we're able to kind of have you take a big deep breath, right? To have you come away with an important learning, to come away with an understanding that yes, this stuff is important. It's really important. This is the livelihood of these composers and authors. But I think more than anything, there's a very real reality that we have to acknowledge here. So I just want to be very upfront about that. We know too that copyright education may not have been something that had been offered to you previously, whether that was in a school program or otherwise. There's also a lot of confusion in practices right now. So our member publishers are still and will always be in total and complete control of their song catalogs. So you may have seen a publishing house that was offering some type of gratis period, especially during the pandemic, well within their right to do so. But that can bring sometimes some confusion in practices when you are working with a licensing company like ours, and when those member publishers are also a part of our service too. So I think more than anything, I just want to thank you all for being here and for taking that first right step and bringing your questions to us as well. So if you're unfamiliar with a little bit of copyright education, I'll share just a couple of important highlights with you here. Copyright's a form of intellectual property law. It protects works of authorship in any type of artistic medium. So we all know that to be anything from books to music to poems to novels to musicals, even computer software can be a protected work of authorship. So copyright, in order to copyright something, it must be in a fixed form. So it must be something that's tangible. So you can't copyright an idea. If you've got a really great idea, I would encourage you to get it on paper and get it copyrighted. It's important to make sure that those works are protected. And typically, to use copyrighted music, you need permission. So it can be as simple as following up with the copyright holder and asking for that permission, or if they happen to be working with an entity like ours who serves as a licensing agent, we can make that process a lot smoother for you. So really and truly, one license, so you only have to go to one place. So our vision for licensing, and this is something that I'm really passionate about, I have an education background, and it's so important to me that you all understand that we are here from a lens of education. There is a big scary word, compliance, that gets thrown around, and that word's important. I won't sugarcoat that. It's important, and you'll hear me share some more difficult pieces of that in the next couple of slides. But more than anything, I want you to know that we are an education forward company, education focused, education oriented, education, education, education. It's incredibly important to us. So we offer a proactive approach to copyright law, so helping you in advance of getting ahead of any issues that you might expect down the road. We know that you want to do the right thing. I don't think anybody would be in ministry if they didn't want to do the right thing. So we're meeting you there in that, I promise. We also promise to you a song database that's clean and accurate. We have over 100,000 titles. We just got a massive upload from Lorenz Publishing. So this number has actually been quite exceeded in the last couple of days. We work with 300 different member publishers as well. So their imprints or their subdivisions or their catalogs may also be covered. We have a page on our website that lists all of the member publishers and the divisions that we work with. We serve the global church, but we specialize in Roman Catholic and mainline Protestant organizations. So if you are mostly, I would say, leaning towards that liturgical side of sacred music, we would be a good place for you to go for your licensing needs. There are other companies that are out there that license their works either directly, which again, more than welcome to do. Folks that self-publish, that's all well and good too. But there are other entities that lean more evangelical or praise and worship in their style of music. So you can have licenses with both if you're looking for music on both services. I know, for example, some organizations have a license for like their high school youth group. They have a different license for them as opposed to what they're using maybe on a typical weekend service. So it's all well and good. You can have a license with whoever you want to. It just depends on who covers the actual content. That is the most important piece in deciding which licensing service is best for you. And like I said earlier, we serve a variety of different organizations. Really, anywhere that the faithful gather, we have a license option that is for you. Some of our premier member publishers are listed here. Hopefully you recognize a good number of them. But like I said, you can visit our website anytime for the full list. We just added 4 new member publishers this month. So the list is constantly changing and being updated, which is a really exciting thing. So some of the trickier topics that I had kind of alluded to earlier, really and truly, we want not only to support you from a lens of education, but also from a lens of being proactive. So allow me to share some of this information with you. These are written in a great sense of reverence, I guess. That's the reverence is the word I would use. At the end of the day, the copyright holder is the one who is responsible if there is a compliance issue. But I think that it's important to share from an educational lens some of the things that we've seen in the industry. So note that this can include damages suffered. So think of this as sales lost, plus any profits from a violation. Statutory damages, we've seen anything from $750 to $30,000 per work. Noted to go up to $150,000 per work. These numbers are hard to say because there isn't a single license on our grid that costs as much as these penalties for non-compliance. So again, having a license is going to help you get ahead of any of these potential issues. Note that any of these 3 entities can be held liable. So the church or the organization, supervisors like pastors and choir directors, even if they had no knowledge of the violation, and even those who participate like choir members. So assuming that the vast majority of you are folks that are in music director types of positions or leadership positions where you have an element of control and good leadership, I'll ask that you not put your choir members in a difficult situation. I have one particular memory of being in a choir that was using Xeroxed music. There are times when Xeroxed music is perfectly fine if you've gotten that permission from the copyright holder. Perhaps if you have secured that permission because you know that there's going to be a lot of writing on those documents. So again, well within your right to request that. But I remember being in a choir and it just being a really uncomfortable experience because I knew that the music was being Xeroxed and it felt strange. It felt really strange to be in a church and to be singing and to have that element of dishonesty. So again, thank you for kind of holding space for some of the difficulty of some of these themes. I think the education piece is really important. So will we really get caught? Good question. Programs using content recognition software like copyright bots can scan the internet and find potential copyright violations. If you've ever uploaded something to YouTube, you know this. This is something that you know. It's something that you probably have firsthand knowledge of. So these aren't individuals. These are bots. These are robots. These are computer programs that are scanning for anything, even 5 or 6 or 7 notes that sounds like something that should be under copyright. So Facebook, YouTube, and other sites monitor for these violations. They also monetize for these types of issues. There are some cases where it's totally and completely fine for you to be including copyrighted material on the internet, but all of those cases would be because you have a license, right? There is no organization that I'm aware of that allows commercial recordings to be used. So including a commercial recording in your service, it's going to be an automatic flag. Those are easy. I mean, those are registered on the internet as commercial recordings. Self-made recordings, however, they require a license. We can help you with that as long as the titles are under our catalog. But I want to flag that it's really important for us to talk about how there are quite literally copyright bots that are out there looking for these types of violations. So I'll also note that copyright owners have up to 3 years to find violations and file for a lawsuit. So we're going to get off this topic in just a second, but I think it's important to kind of take this moment and take a little bit of an inventory of some of your practices, see what you've been posting online, see any areas that you can improve upon, and really make a good start towards having some good steps moving forward. So for us, it's a justice issue. And this is something along with the education lens that I'm really, really passionate about. This is our artist's livelihood. Some of you know authors and composers. Some of you may be authors and composers yourselves. This livelihood allows them to continue their ministries. It's something that's vitally important. So anytime that you use a work, it is important that you report that usage of that work, and then we pay out those royalties all the way to the second decimal, all the way down to the penny. We pay out those royalties to our publishers, our artists, and our composers. 93% of our license holders report a song into any given week, which is a wonderful number. But I tend to be somebody who focuses on that 7% that isn't reporting. We appreciate that they have a license, that they have a paid license, they're moving in the right direction. But what about all those works that are going unreported? Those essentially aren't receiving any royalties, and it's just not fair. Plainly said, it's just not fair. If you've already used copyrighted hymns online without permission, reach out to our team. We'd be happy to help you. We can backdate your permissions. We can add them retroactively. There is a solution that we can provide for you. So just send us an email. We'd be happy to help. That email address is info, I-N-F-O, @onelicense.net. Going forward, please don't use a hymn in an online mass or parish digital communication unless it is number one in the public domain, which I know is something that we'll talk about later on in some of our Q&As. Number two, you have written permission from the copyright holder, or number three, you have an active license that covers that particular hymn. So again, our team is here to help, really and truly education oriented. We're here to help you. So some of you are already license holders with us, which is wonderful. And one of the things that I want you to be aware of is the importance of displaying your permissions online. So immediately when a copyright bot is going through and listening to your service, you'll have a better chance of not having a claim or a flag or a strike on your account. So 3 different words, depending on the service that you're using. You can bypass all of that by having the copyright and the licensing information listed. So it's 2 parts. It's the copyright information. So that would include the song title, the author attribution, the composer attribution, the year, the publisher. That's the copyright piece. And then the licensing piece is the section here. So indicating that you have permission, indicating the number of your license that you have permission with, and that those rights are reserved to your organization. So we get this question a lot, especially with our reprint licenses. If I am hosting a wedding or a funeral or another one-time event, and I'm creating a worship aid, and for those one-time events, it's really seen as a memento, right? Perhaps for a wedding or a funeral, it's highly personalized. If there's a picture of the person who passed away or the name of the couple, highly, highly personalized programs, those are allowed to leave your physical building because you've indicated that the rights are reserved to your organization. So on the back of that booklet, I would expect to see all of the copyright information listed for all of the songs that you used, and then that licensing information at the bottom, indicating that the rights are reserved. So you can imagine if there is a funeral or a wedding, you don't want to have your hospitality committee or your greeters in the back of your church collecting programs. That doesn't feel very hospitable, right? And yet there is this feeling that we have sometimes, I think, this sense of vigilance, that we don't want them to leave. We don't want those pieces of music to be leaving our physical building, because then what happens? And we're liable and we'll be in trouble for it. And that's not true. So indicating that all rights are reserved to your organization is a really, really important line. So then that way Aunt Sally can take her program after the event and keep it as a memento, and that's not something that you're held liable for. So the same thing is true when you're posting a service online. Think of it the same way. If you created this service and you have all self-recorded music that's included with our podcast streaming license, you're allowed to pre-record or you're allowed to have the services be live or a mixture of both. Both we've seen done as well. You are well within your rights to do all of that, but it's important that you indicate the appropriate copyright and licensing information so the church down the street doesn't lift your video off of your website or off of YouTube and then decide that they want to share it themselves. So really, really important stuff. So I want to jump over to Katie. So there were some previously submitted Q&A questions, and we have some answers that we can share with you. If there is any need for discussion, Katie may call on you and ask you for a little bit of an element of clarification. I'm going to stop my screen sharing for just a moment so I can reopen it with our website so I can point out some things in case Katie references those. After we get through the previously submitted Q&As, we can move forward to regular Q&A. And again, I'll keep my screen sharing up so we can demonstrate some things. There are two websites, as I am stopping my screen sharing here, there are two websites that I want to highlight for you. So the first one is our regular website, news.onelicense.net. So this is, onelicense.net is our regular website. So this is the one that you're likely the most familiar with. It will defer to your region based on your IP address, which is why it's saying the US for me. The other page I want to bring your awareness to is news.onelicense.net. So news.onelicense.net. If anything that I shared feels really complicated, and this is the first time that you're hearing any of this information, what I want to encourage you to do is to check out our new user webinar. And if Katie hasn't put this into the chat yet, I'm sure that she will. The new user webinar is a really great resource. We host it in the first quarter of each year, and it has the most comprehensive information for that specific period of time. So again, news.onelicense.net is the name of our blog. You can search new user webinar or the phrase webinar or whatever you prefer. You'll pull up this image here, the 2021 new user webinar, and then that will take you to our post, which includes a good hour-long summary of our services, some good Q&A and all that jazz that's in there. So again, if all of this feels too complicated or you want to be able to pause us and rewind and all that jazz, that new user webinar might be helpful for you. All right, so Katie, I'll hand it over to you. We can feel free to start with some Q&As. And if you want me to demonstrate anything, I'd be happy to.
Perfect. Sounds good. I appreciate you having the site up for me. That makes my job easier. So thank you. So we had a lot of really wonderful questions that some of you folks submitted ahead of time. And for the most part, you know, you're all interested in a lot of the same things. So a few of these I'm going to kind of take some liberties and combine and just offer you some broader answers that will answer each of your specific questions for your organizations. So one question that we had from a number of you is this difference between what our one license podcast and streaming licenses do and the difference between those and the copyright sort of checking or the YouTube bots, how those are finding and recognizing copyrighted music. So Brenna spoke about this just a little bit, but I think this is really one of those important pieces, right, that we're all concerned about. So the big difference for us is that one license is offering you licensing and the permission on the part of our member publishers to utilize these copyrighted titles in both your online services and reprinting if you're able to have in-person services at this point. So the other thing, Brenna mentioned the displaying your permissions and your licensing within that description of the video, and then also within the video itself, if you're able to do that. I think a really easy way to sort of think about the importance of this is to just remember that YouTube or Facebook or Vimeo, whatever format you're using, they don't know whether you have licensing or not, right? And so, first of all, they have just bots that are checking these five or six notes and recognizing things. But also, if you don't list your permissions or your licensing, maybe I'm the composer of a piece and I stumble across your video, and now I'm going to reach out to you because I'm confused why I'm not getting credit and I don't know if you have permissions or not. So being able to display that permissions and licensing info that Brenna shared is really helpful. Also, just to touch on another point that Brenna brought up, our one licenses don't cover the use of master or professional recordings in your online videos. So a number of you asked about clarifying how do I use someone else's YouTube video? So I'll actually ask Brenna if she can head over to the blog site. I don't know, you all must have been very much on the same page as myself and our multimedia specialist this month, because you had a lot of questions about public domain and a lot of questions about using other people's YouTube videos. And those happen to be the two articles we focused on this month. So Sierra, our multimedia specialist, has a really wonderful step-by-step article of how can I use someone else's YouTube video? So your one license permissions don't cover your use of someone else's video. Because what you're going to need to do, you need not only the permission for that copyrighted title, but you also need the permission of the person who created the video. So again, Sierra's article walks you through that, gives you some tips. If you have trouble tracking down any of those folks, feel free to reach out to us, and we can certainly do our best to help you navigate that as well. Brenna's also got those in the chat for you. And now, Brenna, if you want to switch over to the public domain one for me. So public domain, again, there's just a lot to keep track of with this, right? And Bill sent in some really wonderful questions about the use of public domain titles. So for example, one of the things that Bill is curious about, and we had a couple other questions actually come into our ticketing system this morning that I noticed. So if a public domain hymn has a copyrighted descant that's been added to it at some point, but we're not singing or playing that descant, do we still need to cite that descant's copyright? So obviously this is a great question because it's complicated, right? So as long as you aren't using that descant, either by reprinting it or including it in an online service where folks are going to hear it, then no, you don't need to cite that copyright. If it perhaps would be a situation where the descant is printed in your hymnal version. So say your congregation usually sings in 4 parts. And so you tend to just give them that whole hymnal page and the descant is on that page. Even if nobody is singing it, then you do want to report it since they can visually see it in that reprint. And that would be the same whether it's, if it's a public domain hymn that you're dealing with or a hymn that has its own copyright on text and tune, and you have that same situation with a descant. The other thing, and this public domain piece talks about this quite a lot, there are differences, right, with how many years it takes before something enters the public domain depending on region. So if you have any questions about that, or if you worry that maybe there's an exception to a particular piece that you're using, your best bet is always going to be to reach out to the copyright holder directly and double check. So for example, a lot of pieces, right, enter the public domain after 70 years following the death of the contributor in the US. In Canada, it's usually 50, right? But you're using YouTube and you're using these other sources. If you're not sure, for sure, whether it should be public domain or whether you should be citing that copyright holder, just reach out to the copyright holder and ask. They've been really receptive. You can also reach out to us, and sometimes we're able to provide you with a little more direct contact, or for some popular pieces, maybe we already know what that particular copyright holder prefers that you do.
Katie, I appreciate you sharing some of these ideas because I think they're really important. And Katie did a wonderful job on this post. Everybody, if you want to take a look at it afterwards, I think Silent Night is an example that we all know is in the public domain. Not only do we know it just because it's in our common knowledge, right? But there's also some really specific information that tells us that. So we know that the death of the authors were in the 1800s. We are well beyond we don't even have to do the math, right? We don't even have to do the math to know that this piece is in the public domain. So if you're reprinting it for your Christmas service, or if you're playing the public domain tune and text, you're posting it on your online service and you have the license to be able to post your services online regularly, right? Then there's no license that's needed to use a public domain piece, right? Of course, we encourage you to still have that copyright attribution there, right? We're always going to encourage those things because it's just a good standard practice. But the piece that's really important about this, going back to Bill's question about the soprano descant, if there is an arrangement that is by a living composer, that is who you're going to indicate. And then that's the piece that you're going to report. So if I wrote a descant for this piece, I would expect that as the arranger of the descant that I would be earning a royalty for that, right? And there's all kinds of behind the scenes stuff in our system. It might not be a full credit, it might be a partial credit. That's a whole behind the scenes thing that we don't need to worry about. The member publisher is who indicates all of that information. But I think it's really important to highlight the difference between a true public domain piece and then one that has a living contributor that has had some type of arrangement on top of that.
Thank you for that clarification. I think that's really helpful. I think another piece of that worth mentioning, right, is that sometimes the text will be copyrighted, but the tune will be public domain and vice versa. And so really, that doesn't mean that you can't use it. It just means that you might need to find another way to get those permissions, right? And this actually connects into one of Suzanne's questions for us a little bit. So the text of a hymn isn't listed in the One License database, but it's from someone's estate, but the tune is in the public domain. So my suggestion for that is hopefully we're lucky enough to have all of these great resources like Google and hymnary.org and all of those things, right? And so often you can track down some contact information for a composer's estate and who manages those titles, or perhaps if one of the larger publishers took over that person's catalog, things like that. There again, you can reach out to us, and sometimes we're able to do enough detective work to help you get that information and help you get those permissions, even if it's something a little obscure or a publishing house that's closed or something like that. So never underestimate the power of hymnary.org or Googling or reaching out to us, and we can help you work on that. Since that one was one of Suzanne's questions, we've got a couple others from her too, and then we can open it up for some live questions. So Suzanne has a really great question. Will more organ music be listed with one license in the future? Absolutely. So our member publishers are working really hard to get those instrumental and choral titles added in. As Brenna mentioned, Lorenz Publishing Company actually just added just over 49,000 titles last week. So they are definitely working on it, but you can also help them to do that a little bit. So if you're playing a piece that is from one of our member publishers and that publisher participates in the podcast streaming, go ahead and fill out a manual submission through your account. And for folks who maybe don't have an account yet or just sort of learning about all of this for the first time, once you have a license, you're able to log in and you'll see a search engine that will allow you to search our database by title or publisher or contributor, lots of different options. We recently added where you can search by language, all of those things. When you submit those manual submissions, try and put as much information as you have from that original copy, because those submissions go directly to the member publisher that they involve. And then they're able to take a look at that and say, oh, yep, we do cover that. That should be in the system. And then they can just use the data you've put in to automatically add that title. So if you have, reason to believe that this should be covered, it's a member publisher, they participate in podcast streaming, go ahead and fill out that manual submission, and the publisher will be in touch and either accept or tell you, oh, somebody else already added this one, so it's in there now. Or if maybe that copyright has changed hands, they'll give you that information so that we can help you find the right way to get it into the catalog.
Katie, I appreciate you highlighting that. There's an element of the manual submission process that's very organic in nature. So we have a really great article on this one too. We have great articles for everything. You can search the phrase manual and that'll pop up for you. But if you're familiar with our service, you've likely seen this screen before. Our manual submission process was a way to build catalogs organically. So where you might send a title in every so often that you come across something that you feel like should be covered, but it's not included, the pandemic and everyone posting their services online exploded this entire process. So I think that's part of the reason why companies like Lorenz, very much to their credit, have gone through and done the work of, 49,000 titles, that's a lot of data. It would be a lot of data for 49 titles, let alone adding a couple of zeros to that. So the element of having our member publishers being really proactive about what they're adding is something that we're very excited and we're very humbled about. It's something that is really, really important so that way you have the most comprehensive experience on the website. It's important to note, and this is something that might be seen as obvious, so it's easy for us to skip over it, but our service is intended for congregational use only. So I want to make sure that I highlight that. So primarily, we're a reporting service for congregational pieces, and then secondarily, we're a downloading service. So we showed a little bit of this earlier, but I will search for a quick title here. If you're searching for a song, it's covered by a member publisher that you know is a part of our service. If it's one of our premier member publishers, they may even have image files available, right, that you can download. Some of our member publishers don't. That's entirely up to them. But it's important to highlight here that when you're taking a look at what these pieces are, it's the congregational portion. So our service, unfortunately, doesn't allow you to reprint instrumental music, choral music for your cantors, for your accompanists, etc. So it's just for your congregation. But the piece that does come into play when we're talking about preludes and postludes and other instrumental pieces is the podcast streaming license. So if you have a bundle license with us, which is our by far and away our most popular and our most comprehensive form of a license, the reprint piece allows you to reprint text and or music in a worship aid, on your screen, on a projection screen, on a leaflet. We give you a lot of creativity as to what that process looks like. But then when you're posting your services online, that's when you can have those added permissions for including a choral anthem or an organ prelude or something like that. Katie, feel free to get back to your Q&As.
I know that was perfect. That actually kind of led nicely into the next one. So one of our next questions is, some folks think as long as the publisher is listed as a member, they can use any music by that publisher. That is not true, correct? So yes, you're absolutely correct. That is not true. So if the member publisher does participate in podcast streaming, you can be relatively certain that a title is going to be covered. Now, there are some exceptions to that, but in general, if they are a member publisher and they participate in podcast streaming, that is at least a good enough indication for you to fill out a manual submission or for you to reach out to the publisher directly to check in about a specific title. The only way to be 100% sure that you're covered with that title under the license is to do that manual submission and wait for it to be accepted, or reach out to the member publisher directly. And then sometimes they can, just let you know that, yep, that's fine. And they'll approve your manual submission soon. So that's, I think, a helpful, definitely one of those a little bit of gray area. So for those of us who plan a little bit further ahead to give ourselves some time on that, that is definitely helpful. But also our member publishers work really hard to keep up with those submissions the best that they can, and to be in touch with us and our license holders to get you that information as quickly as they can, so that you can go on with leading worship. Related to this, Brenna, if you want to navigate your way to the hymnal drop down for me. So just because your hymnal isn't in the drop down doesn't mean that we don't cover those titles, right? So as Brenna mentioned, our member publishers have complete control of their catalogs, and they get to decide how and what they put into our database. So the things that are available for downloading versus things that don't have an image file, that is completely up to the publisher. So if your hymnal isn't one of the included ones, it can be a little bit overwhelming, right? Because there are lots of examples of some of our favorite hymns, right? Because we all have them in our hymnals. So one thing that I do to try and narrow those options, right? Go ahead and search by title and then narrow by contributor. For the most part, that should give you only a handful to try and double check with your hymnal and make sure that your contributors and your years are the same. The other feature that I really, really love in our setup is the list option. So what I will do is when I find, the correct Advent hymn that I like to use and that I want to make sure I keep track of for next year when I use it again, I'll go ahead and put that into a list. And then I can just report from that list rather than having to search our entire database. So my last church job, I actually had a number of lists with by liturgical season, so that I just knew, okay, all my Easter music is in here, all my Advent music is in here. And then for the most part, if it's, the old standbys that I know folks love to sing, those are easy for me to find now. We've also had music directors do lists by hymnal section. So, if you have a communion section or a Christ teaching section, you can arrange things that way so that you have a little smaller list to be trying to deal with that way. So Brenna's showing you some of those list options while I talk. Thank you for that, Brenna. But yes, and really, we understand that you're doing your very best, right? And we always assume best of intentions. And so if what you're seeing in your hymnal is what you're seeing with the copyright information in our site, then you're doing everything right and you are on the right track. I think I do have one more question from Suzanne about hymn tunes and texts not having a podcast license listed. And I wonder, Suzanne, if you would be willing to unmute yourself and give me a little more information on this one. I'm not sure I'm fully understanding what you're seeing and what you would like to know.
So, for example, she was just showing, like, for example, it says all are welcome and it says report. And sometimes I've gone on that and all it says report, but then it doesn't give a podcast license. So I thought, okay, so that means I actually can't use it.
I have not. Brenna, have you seen that happen before? I think you stumped me. I have not seen our system do that.
Yeah, Suzanne, as long as you have a podcast streaming license, you should, when you're reporting a title, you should see all three of these options in the dropdown. So for example, an organ prelude or choral anthem would be something that you would want to indicate as podcast only. But all are welcome, for example, a song that's commonly known for the congregation to participate in, then you would indicate that it was probably reprinted in podcast. Podcast, just a general word referring to posting it online. So whether that's pre-recorded or live is totally just fine. No worries there. It's all dependent upon the type of use that you're experiencing the song with, and then that's what you report.
Okay. So if I only have, for Lent, I have tried to only use hymns in public domain. Do I still need to report them to you guys?
If they're truly 100%
Yeah,
public
truly,
domain,
yes.
with no living arranger or anything like that, then no, there's no need to report them. You may benefit from, I was mentioning Silent Night earlier, right? You may benefit from having image files available on the website for you to download. That's an added benefit that's there. But if I was to click this green report button just as like having a good habit, the report wouldn't go anywhere. So we know that behind the scenes in the system. We have the contributors listed as public domain here, so that money isn't going to go anywhere. But this one, for example, it looks like there's an arrangement or something special by Michael John Trotta. So if you are using that version, you would report that one accordingly. But Suzanne, no, it sounds like if you're just using public domain for Lent and for Easter, no worries there at all.
May I ask one question? I ended up having to play for an in-person funeral when we were still open in BC, and we were looking at one of the hymnals that is actually listed down here, and then and that is one of my questions, are if that hymnal is listed, is every single title automatically included? Because some of the titles we couldn't find.
Sure, that's a fantastic question. So it's good to remember that copyrights are song specific and not hymnal specific.
Okay.
So important. If you want to take that away as your key learning, go for it. I'm going to give you that sentence again. Copyrights are song specific and not hymnal specific or book specific. So if the melody line or the lyric to a song is copyrighted by any one of our member publishers, it's covered regardless of who published the book or the hymnal. So if you're finding a piece in a hymnal resource and you, let's say, for example, I want to pull up Gather Comprehensive because that's one that I'm familiar with. Let's search for song number 900. I don't think it has 900 pages, which is why I picked a number so high. It'll tell me that there are no results found. But that doesn't mean that the song isn't covered. You have to then search by title, and then it will pull up the results. So always, 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 always search by title and maybe even narrow by contributor or composer or author. And the reason for that is our member publishers participate on a lot of different levels. Some of them just add their title information and that's it. Some of them add image files. Some of them link to their hymnal. It's not a complicated process, but it's certainly a time-consuming process. And not all of our member publishers have indexed, if that's the word you want to use, indexed their hymnal data on the website. So the titles might be there, but you might not be able to search for them by hymnal. Does that make sense?
And can I ask another question? Sorry, I'm gonna roll here because I'm seeing this.
Go for it.
I'm seeing this the whole Zoom service. So we are doing live stream services. My sister in another province, they're doing Zoom services, and she's been saying, well, this does not apply to us because we don't record it, and it's just a a private Zoom link that's given out to all the members to look at. But I'm looking at the chat. And it says, yes, the Zoom service does count as posting online even when it is not recorded. So she'll be interested to learn that because she's been telling me, oh, I don't have to worry about any of this. And I said, well, this is interesting to know. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
I'd be happy to. So I hesitate to start a fight amongst the sisters. But you're right. She might be interested in learning that. And I encourage you to have her reach out to us. We'd be happy, again, from an education perspective, we'd be happy to backdate her account and help her figure out how to work through that. But you want to think about this idea of taking it outside of your four walls of your sanctuary. So when a hymnal, the vast majority of folks have a hymnal or have purchased lots of hymnals, 500 copies or something like that. The purpose of that only allows you to use that resource within your building, within your four walls. Now, don't think that that's like overly specific, because if you're going to have a parking lot service or overflow for the Christmas service in the parish hall, all good, no worries. So don't take that too legalistically. But there is an element, I think, of encouraging folks who are using music outside of those four walls to make sure that they have the proper licensing to do that. So it doesn't matter to us whether it's a private Zoom service or if it's a public Zoom service or if it's a Facebook Live or a YouTube or a Vimeo or your church website. There's an analogy that I like to use, if you'll humor me as a sporty person. I'm going to serve the volleyball over the net to you. However you bump it, spike it, drop it, kick it, however you interact with it is entirely up to you. We leave that creativity up to you. So we're not going to have different expectations of you if you are a worship aid church or if you're a projection screen church. If you post your service online on this website or on this website, those are getting into some, you know, finer kind of delineations that we don't have a preference over. Your church, your organization, your governing body may have an opinion for you about what you should be using, but we don't. But unfortunately, yes, you do need a podcast streaming license if you are using copyrighted material in your private Zoom service. So if you're just using public domain music, no worries. No worries at all. But if you're using copyrighted material, you're going to want a license to be able to do that correctly and legally.
So she's fine. They actually have a license, but I don't think she's anything has been reported. So that's the issue, right?
Sure. Have her reach out to us. We'd be happy to look into her
Yeah.
reporting history and see
If there is
what the
none.
situation is there. We'd be happy to help.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your questions. Katie, is there any questions from the chat that you want to highlight for everyone's benefit? Because I know that after this is recorded and shared, we won't get the benefit of seeing the chat.
Perfect. I was just keeping a little list of those so that I could bring those up. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about this one because I think it's really helpful. So Gary has asked, in pre-recorded services, there's no congregational singing because of COVID rules, but do our licenses authorize the singing of a soloist or a small ensemble?
Yes. Yes. I thought for a second that was going to be a safety question. So I can't speak to that because we all have different things going on in different countries and different regions and all of the chaos of all of this. But if you have a soloist or a schola or a choir or anyone who is then taking that music and it's being posted online, whether it's pre-recorded or live, you need a license to do that. So again, it's kind of like back to that volleyball analogy in a way. It doesn't matter whether it's an organ prelude or if it's choral anthem, they both should be reported through our website as long as the member publisher is a part of our service, of course. That's always a given.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm answering a question right now that I think is really helpful. I don't think I've ever had anyone ask this question before, and I appreciate it. So if I'm using something for an entire season, do I report it for the dates or the number of services? I've been reporting dates, hoping that this is the right approach.
Oh, sure. So if you're using, for example, like the same gathering song for all of your Lenten services, so you have a couple of ways that you can do that when you're going to the report usage tab. And again, this is a dummy account. This is just my account. So don't get worried about all of these red 0 reported titles here. But if you're using the same piece and you're duplicating it for a number of different weeks, that's just fine. Another option would be to just report it once and then to change the number of services that you used it for. So for example, we've got this week here. You can indicate that you used it for a higher number of services, right? My recommendation though, always, this is just always my recommendation, is that you keep your reporting history accurate on the website so you can always refer back to it. So the date for Ash Wednesday or the date for Easter is always going to change, right? And you may have really meticulous records in your office, and that's wonderful. But for you to be able to either use the list feature that Katie talked about, pulling up all of the music that you used for Triduum last year, or pulling up all of the music that you used for one specific weekend in the liturgical calendar, it's really, really helpful to be able to have your whole calendar kind of populated here as to what you're using so you can go back and reference it. If you report one song under 1 week, but increase the number of titles, then you're not going to get that kind of help and assistance that you might benefit from of seeing that you used that same song all those 6 weeks in a row. So it doesn't change the way that the report is in the system, but it might change your experience and your kind of historical record.
Great. I think we are pretty well caught up on questions. I wonder, Brenna, if it might be helpful to pull up the not a quick fix. We did have quite a few questions about listing permissions and licensing. And in that piece there again, it walks you through different options for how you can get those permissions and that licensing information into not only the description of your video, but also within the video itself. And as Brenna mentioned early on, it's a good idea, just any music that is included, whether it's copyrighted, public domain, anything that is in that online service, make sure that you're listing the title, the contributors, publisher information, and copyright information if that's there, or if it's public domain, I often will just, where I would normally put the publisher and copyright year, just put the words public domain. It's certainly like a justice issue, as Brenna spoke about, to give folks their due and give them credit for their creative work. But also we are hearing from a lot of license holders that it does tend to cut down on those claims and flags that we're seeing from some of these sites.
Katie, thanks for highlighting that. I appreciate it. Folks, it's amazing how fast the time goes. We're nearing the end of our time together, so I do want to pass it back to Angelique in case there are additional questions that would be helpful for your specific audience for us to cover. But before I do that, I'm putting into the chat, and I'll say it out loud here for everyone else's benefit. You're welcome to email us anytime at info@onelicense.net. If you happen to have an account with us, you can also click on this contact button here, and then that'll help you send an email to us. If you want to put your subject line as RCCO webinar or something that helps us know that you were a part of this conversation, Katie and I and our team will be sure to not only answer your question, but also have a little bit of context around the conversation that we were having in case there's anything that we can offer clarification to. So I hope that that information is helpful. Again, as a reminder, that new user webinar might be a really good place for you to start too. Again, that's news.onelicense.net, just the blog post that we were talking about earlier. Type in that word webinar and then you'll find that resource there. So Angelique, I'll pass it back to you. I know, again, like I said in the beginning, we couldn't possibly cover every single question in just an hour, but is there anything else in particular that we can highlight for your group specifically?
Well, I can't think of anything right now. I think you covered everything pretty thoroughly. And as you mentioned, if anyone has any more questions, they can contact the team at info@onelicense.net. And I know Sandra and I have been taking down all the links, and we'll send that out with the video to for anyone who needs it too.
Okay, great. Very good. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation today. Again, we're here to help and we're here to educate. So don't think that emailing us is a scary thing. We're not here to get you in trouble. We're here to help. And moreover than anything, we just hope that we can all stay safe and healthy and we can be back together gathering and in worship again. I know that it's something that Katie and I talk about, we miss desperately, and we look forward to getting back to. So I hope that you all have a really wonderful end to your Lent and beginning of your Easter seasons. And we're just so grateful that you had us for this conversation today. So thank you.